talking about engagement in the public realm, they're talking about all sorts of exciting changes to the streets, but that doesn't mean the conversation ends. And we wanted to use the Street Talk Forum as a means of just sort of pushing that conversation on in all sorts of ways as to what the city means to the people who live here, how they affect change, how people are included in that change.
Most people thought that we would actually be, sort of driving to a park and then just cycling laps around the park. So we had to explain that we were actually going to cycle from one place to another. And the majority of them, despite having lived for years in Walthamstow, didn't know the marshes were there, didn't know the Lee Valley was there, which is very common. That's something that we hear all the time. So Hamid, who we see here, he's a lot slimmer now than that. And his diabetes has massively, improved, is really under control. So he, having not cycled since childhood, then became a ride leader, became a cycling instructor, and pretty much gets everybody he knows into cycling. There's a monthly cycle to Madrasa Day. Those role models are really important. We've learned that the infrastructure and cycle training are not enough on their own to reach, the sort of harder to reach groups. We really do need rides to be accessible and inclusive. And what's been particularly successful, I think, is the integration of the lead rides and the cycle training.
You can be part of different communities subsequently or simultaneously, and you can be passive or active members of those communities. I loosely broke community down into 3 different categories. So communities defined by shared space, communities defined by shared purpose, and community of shared interests. You'll know areas changing when you see a bike shop open. So we used to live in Peckham, a bike shop open. Brixton, bike shops. And now Tower Bridge Road, bike shops. So you know something's changing when a bike shop's happening. Why is that? Why does cycling lend itself more perhaps to young professionals or the middle classes, more so than perhaps local people?
But had the motorway plans been built the way the planners wanted, you would have had junctions like this everywhere. In Lewisham, in Newcastle, in Peckham, Loughborough Junction, Clapham Road, Clapham Junction, all would have been scarred by junctions of this size or larger. So imagine that coming down to your high street, what it would have done to businesses, done to communities. Imagine crossing the road from there to there with a road junction of this size.
But there's a lot of young people who are excellent bike mechanics on these estates. When people do these schemes, who do they really talk to? And this is the number one question. Like, who are they spoken to? Who are these local communities? And that fascinated me reading your paragraph about local communities. So I thought, what does that mean now in London?
Very much like the Mini Holland programme was introduced, and it was as if people were being sort of forced to, not forced to give up their cars, but obviously pushed very strongly to give up their cars without really being given a serious alternative, because it's a massive shift, especially if you've got a big family, you've never learned to ride, you've got all those barriers there. You're not just going to start cycling overnight, and training a few kids in the schools is just not enough. So I think there could have been more soft measures put into place, more education, and more focus on the training aspect. And actually introducing things like the social rides, which has come but from the community, not from the council.